chicken nuggets and was excited to see what toy would be inside. But the toy he received that night would change his life forever. Inside the Happy Meal box was a small action figure that Tommy had never seen before. It wasn't part of any movie promotion or cartoon tie-in. The figure was about 4 inches tall, dressed in a miniature McDonald's uniform, with a painted-on smile that seemed to follow Tommy wherever he went. There was no packaging, no instructions, and no indication of what series it belonged to. Tommy's mother, Susan, thought the toy looked cheaply made and somewhat creepy, but Tommy was fascinated by it. He named the figure Mac and carried it with him everywhere. Mac had movable arms and legs, but Tommy swore the toy could move by itself when no one was looking. "Mac talks to me," Tommy told his mother on the second day. "He tells me about the restaurant where he works. He says it's not like the McDonald's we went to. His restaurant is different." Susan dismissed this as typical childhood imagination, but she noticed that Tommy had stopped playing with his other toys. He spent hours sitting on his bedroom floor, having elaborate conversations with Mac, listening intently as if the toy were actually speaking to him. On the third night, Susan woke up to find Tommy's bedroom empty. She found him in the kitchen, standing on a chair, reaching into the freezer. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" "Mac is hungry," Tommy replied without turning around. "He wants the special meat, the meat that talks." Susan called the McDonald's where they'd eaten and described the toy to the manager. The manager insisted that they weren't currently distributing any toys that matched Susan's description. "Ma'am, we've never had Happy Meal toys that look like McDonald's employees. Corporate doesn't allow that for liability reasons." Susan decided to take the toy away from Tommy, but when she went to his room, Mac was nowhere to be found. That night, she heard Tommy talking to someone in his room again. She crept to his doorway and listened. Tommy was having a detailed conversation about working at a McDonald's restaurant, describing tasks like cleaning the grill, taking orders, and preparing food. "Yes, Mac, I understand," Tommy whispered. "The customers who come to your restaurant are special. They've been waiting a long time to be served." Susan entered the room and found Tommy sitting cross-legged on his bed, holding Mac and staring at the toy with intense concentration. The toy's painted smile seemed wider than before, and its plastic eyes appeared to be looking directly at Susan. Susan took Mac away despite Tommy's protests. She locked the toy in her bedroom closet, but the next morning it was back in Tommy's room. When she asked Tommy how he'd gotten it back, he just smiled and said, "Mac is really good at his job." Over the next week, Tommy's behavior became increasingly disturbing. He stopped eating regular food, claiming that Mac had taught him about special ingredients. He drew pictures of a McDonald's restaurant that looked normal from the outside but had strange details. Customers with no faces, employees with too many arms, and a kitchen that extended far underground. Tommy began sleepwalking, and Susan would find him in the kitchen at night, arranging raw hamburger meat into patterns on the counter. When she woke him up, he would say, "I'm practicing for Mac's restaurant. He says I'm almost ready to start my real job." Susan researched the toy online but couldn't find any information about it. She even took it to a toy expert, who examined it and declared that it wasn't made by any major toy manufacturer. The plastic was an unusual composition, the paint contained materials that hadn't been used in toys for decades, and the internal mechanisms were far more complex than necessary for a simple action figure. One night, Susan decided to stay awake and watch Tommy's room. At exactly 3 a.m., she saw Mac climb out of Tommy's toy box and walk across the room to Tommy's bed. The toy whispered something in Tommy's ear, and Tommy sat up, his eyes still closed but somehow aware. Tommy followed Mac out of his room and down to the kitchen. Susan watched in horror as Mac directed Tommy to open the refrigerator and begin removing items: raw meat, expired milk, moldy vegetables. Tommy arranged these ingredients on the counter as if he were preparing a meal, all while Mac stood on the counter, pointing and gesturing like a tiny supervisor. "Very good, Tommy," Mac said in a voice like grinding plastic. "You're learning quickly. Soon you'll be ready to work at the real restaurant, where the special customers are waiting." Susan grabbed Mac and threw the toy into the garbage disposal, turning it on immediately. But as the grinding sound filled the kitchen, she heard Mac's voice laughing. "You can't destroy me, Susan. I'm not just a toy, I'm a recruiter, and Tommy has been selected for a very special position. The next morning, the garbage disposal was empty, and Mac was back in Tommy's room. But now there were more toys, dozens of tiny McDonald's employee figures, all with the same painted smile, all moving independently when no one was directly watching them. Tommy announced that he didn't want to go to school anymore. Mac says I don't need regular school. He's teaching me everything I need to know about customer service and food preparation. He says the restaurant is almost ready to open its doors to me. Susan tried to get help from child psychologists, priests, anyone who might understand what was happening. But every expert who examined the toys declared them to be ordinary plastic figures. Only Susan and Tommy could see them move, hear them speak, witness their supernatural influence. On Tommy's 9th birthday, exactly 1 year after receiving Mac, Tommy disappeared. Susan found his bedroom empty except for a note written in his childish handwriting. Gone to work at Mac's restaurant. Don't worry, Mom. The special customers have been waiting so long to be served. I'll be the best employee they've ever had. Susan never saw Tommy again, but sometimes, late at night, she would drive past McDonald's restaurants and see a small figure in the window, a child-sized employee taking orders, serving food to customers who cast no shadows and made no sound. Mac had found his perfect recruit, and somewhere in a McDonald's that existed between dimensions, Tommy was finally living his dream of working in fast food. The cycle would continue, as more Happy Meal toys found their way to lonely children who needed purpose, who wanted to belong, who were ready to serve customers that had been waiting far too long for their orders to be filled. Sterling Blackthorne was driving through rural Nebraska at 2 a.m. when he saw the golden arches glowing in the darkness. He'd been on the road for 14 hours straight and his stomach was cramping from hunger. The McDonald's looked normal from the outside. Standard layout, bright lighting, clean parking lot. But something felt wrong the moment Sterling walked inside. The restaurant was completely empty except for a single employee behind the counter. A young man with a perfectly normal McDonald's uniform and a name tag that read Trevor. Nothing unusual, except Trevor was staring directly at Sterling with an expression that seemed almost hungry. "Welcome to McDonald's. I know exactly what you want," Trevor said before Sterling could speak. Sterling found this odd, but assumed the employee was just being friendly. "Actually, I'll take a Big Mac meal with—" "No," Trevor interrupted. "You want order number 847. That's what you really came here for." Sterling had never heard of order number 847, and it wasn't on any menu board, but Trevor was already punching buttons on the register with mechanical precision. "I think there's been a mistake," Sterling said. "I just want a Big Mac." Trevor stopped typing and looked up with eyes that seemed completely black in the fluorescent lighting. "There are no mistakes here, only orders that need to be filled. Your total is $6.66. The price was wrong for any McDonald's meal Sterling knew, but he was exhausted and hungry. He paid with exact change and sat down to wait, noticing that the restaurant's usual sounds were missing. No sizzling grills, no beeping timers, no background music, just absolute silence. Trevor disappeared into the kitchen area. Sterling could hear movement back there, but it didn't sound like normal food preparation. It sounded like something large being dragged across the floor. 20 minutes passed. No other customers entered and Trevor didn't return. Sterling was about to leave when he heard his name called from the kitchen, though he'd never told Trevor what it was. "Sterling, order 847 is ready." Trevor emerged carrying a standard McDonald's bag and cup, but something was wrong with the packaging. The bag looked older somehow, and the McDonald's logo was slightly different, a version Sterling had never seen before. "Enjoy your meal," Trevor said, placing the order on the counter. "You're going to love what we prepared specially for you." Sterling took the bag and immediately noticed it was warm, but the warmth felt wrong. Not like hot food, but like something that had been sitting in the sun for hours. The cup contained what looked like Coca-Cola, but it was completely black and didn't bubble. He opened the bag in his car and found a burger that looked almost normal. Almost. The bun was the right color and texture, But when Sterling picked it up, he realized it was heavier than it should be. Much heavier. The first bite tasted exactly like a Big Mac. The second bite tasted like something that had been buried underground for weeks. By the third bite, Sterling realized he wasn't chewing meat at all. He spit out the food and examined it under his car's dome light. The burger contained what looked like shredded newspaper, dirt, and small pieces of what might have been fabric. But somehow, it had tasted like normal McDonald's food while he was eating it. Sterling threw the bag away and drove back to confront Trevor, but the McDonald's was gone. Not closed, gone. Where the restaurant had stood was an empty lot with no foundation, no signs it had ever existed. But Sterling's receipt was still in his pocket, dated that same night, from a McDonald's location that wasn't there. The real horror began 3 days later. Sterling started craving order number 847, not McDonald's food in general, specifically that exact order from that exact restaurant. The craving was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It consumed his thoughts, disrupted his sleep, made it impossible to concentrate on anything else. He drove back to the empty lot every night for a week, hoping the restaurant would reappear. On the 7th night, it did. Trevor was waiting behind the counter with the same hungry expression, as if no time had passed at all. "Welcome back, Sterling. Ready for another order 847? Sterling wanted to leave, but his craving overrode his fear. He ordered the same meal, paid the same $6.66, and received the same bag of impossible ingredients that tasted like real food until he stopped chewing. This cycle continued for months. The McDonald's would appear randomly, always at night, always with Trevor waiting. Sterling would eat the disgusting meal that somehow satisfied him completely. Then the restaurant would vanish, leaving only an empty lot and an unbearable craving that would build until the next appearance. Sterling tried ordering different items, but Trevor always gave him order 847. He tried bringing friends, but they could never see the restaurant when it was there. To them, Sterling appeared to be standing in an empty lot, talking to nobody. The final time Sterling visited the Phantom McDonald's, Trevor had a different message. "This is your last order 847, Sterling. You've eaten enough to complete the transformation. Tomorrow, you start working here." Sterling never returned home. His family reported him missing, but police could find no trace of him. The empty lot remains empty during the day, but late at night, travelers on that stretch of Nebraska highway sometimes see golden arches glowing in the darkness. Those brave enough to stop report the same experience. A single employee behind the counter who knows exactly what they want. A meal that costs $6.66 and contains ingredients that shouldn't exist, but taste like everything they've ever craved. The employee's name tag always reads Sterling now, and he's always hungry for new customers to serve order 847. Derek had been working at McDonald's for 8 years, but he'd never experienced anything like his first week as night shift manager at the location on Highway 47. The restaurant had been built in 1987 on what used to be farmland, and according to local stories, the farmer who sold the land had died in a tractor accident just days before construction began. The building looked exactly like every other McDonald's, red and yellow exterior, familiar layout, the same menu boards. But Derek noticed strange things from his very first shift. The ice cream machine worked perfectly, which was unusual enough to be concerning. The fryer oil never seemed to get dirty, no matter how much food they cooked, and the security cameras picked up movement in the dining area, even when the restaurant was completely empty. Derek's predecessor, Janet Morrison, had quit suddenly after working there for 12 years. She'd left behind a handwritten note in the manager's office that simply said, "Don't work alone after 2 a.m., don't check the playground after closing, and never, ever look in the freezer when you hear the humming." Derek had dismissed the note as the ramblings of a stressed employee, but by his third night, he was beginning to understand. The restaurant felt different after 2 a.m. The fluorescent lights seemed dimmer, casting strange shadows that moved independently. The usual sounds of the kitchen equipment took on an ominous quality, and Derek could swear he heard voices coming from the empty dining room. It was on his 5th night that Derek first heard the humming. It was coming from the walk-in freezer, a low, melodic sound that seemed almost human. He remembered Janet's note, but curiosity got the better of him. He opened the freezer door and found something that made his blood run cold. Inside, hanging from meat hooks alongside the frozen beef patties, were what looked like human shapes wrapped in freezer paper. They were the right size and proportion to be bodies, and they were humming, a soft, mournful tune that sounded like a lullaby. Derek slammed the freezer door shut and called the police, but when they arrived and checked the freezer, they found only the usual frozen food inventory. The officers looked at Derek like he was having a breakdown and left. Derek started researching the history of the land beneath the restaurant. The farm had been owned by the Hendricks family for 3 generations. In 1986, patriarch William Hendricks had been struggling with mounting debts and had reluctantly agreed to sell to McDonald's Corporation. But William had been found dead in his barn 3 days before the sale was finalized, apparently crushed by his own tractor. William's wife Martha and their 3 children, ages 8, 12, and 15, had disappeared shortly after the funeral. Police assumed they'd left town to start over somewhere else, but they were never found. The McDonald's was built on the exact spot where the Hendricks farmhouse had stood. On his 7th night, Derek decided to investigate the playground area after closing. The playground was in the back corner of the dining room, and at night, it took on a sinister appearance. As he approached with his flashlight, he could hear sounds coming from inside the play structure, whispers, soft crying, and what sounded like children playing games. He shined his flashlight into one of the tubes and saw children inside the playground, but they weren't normal children. Their skin was pale and waxy, their clothes were old-fashioned farm attire from the 1980s, and their eyes were completely black. One of the children, a girl of about 12, crawled toward the opening. "Are you the new manager? The man who's going to help us?" Derek tried to run, but found he couldn't move. The other children were emerging from the playground equipment, 2 boys and another girl, all with the same pale skin and black eyes. Derek realized these were the missing Hendricks children, trapped in the restaurant built on their family's land. "We've been waiting so long," the older boy said. "Every night we play the same games, eat the same food, live the same day over and over, but we need someone to join us." Derek looked around the restaurant and realized the truth. The perfect ice cream machine, the clean fryer oil, the security cameras picking up movement. The Hendricks children had been maintaining the restaurant, keeping it running exactly as it was supposed to be. They were trapped in an eternal loop, playing house with a McDonald's restaurant. "What happened to your parents?" Derek asked. The girl pointed toward the kitchen. "Daddy's in the freezer. He's always humming the song he used to sing to us at bedtime. Mommy's in the manager's office." Derek felt a strange compulsion to agree to stay with them. The children seemed so sad, so lonely. But as he was about to say yes, Derek caught sight of his reflection in the window. His skin was becoming pale and waxy, his eyes were darkening, and his clothes were changing to match an old McDonald's uniform. Derek broke free from their influence and ran toward the exit, but the doors wouldn't open. He was trapped in the restaurant with the Hendricks family, who were no longer pretending to be friendly. "You can't leave," Martha Hendricks said, emerging from the manager's office. "Nobody leaves our restaurant unsatisfied." William Hendricks shambled out of the kitchen, his body crushed and mangled from the tractor accident, but somehow still mobile. "Welcome to the family. I hope you're ready for the night shift that never ends." Derek spent the rest of the night trying to escape, but every exit led back into the restaurant. As dawn broke in the real world, Derek found himself standing behind the counter, wearing a McDonald's uniform, ready to serve customers alongside the Hendricks family. The next week, corporate sent a new night manager to replace Derek, who had mysteriously disappeared. The new manager found a handwritten note in the office. "Don't work alone after 2 a.m. Don't check the playground after closing, and never ever look in the freezer when you hear the humming." The McDonald's Playplace on Cedar Street was every parent's nightmare disguised as a children's paradise. What started as a routine birthday party for 5-year-old Madison Cooper became a supernatural disaster that would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. Madison's mother, Carol, had chosen the location because it was new, clean, and had an elaborate indoor playground with tubes, slides, and a ball pit that seemed to stretch impossibly deep. The Playplace was separated from the main restaurant by soundproof glass, allowing parents to watch their children play while enjoying their meals in relative quiet. The party started normally. 12 children between the ages of 4 and 7 ran through the playground equipment, laughing and screaming with joy. Carol and the other parents sat at tables outside the Playplace, chatting and keeping one eye on their kids through the glass partition. But as the afternoon progressed, Carol noticed something strange about the playground. The tubes and tunnels seemed to be rearranging themselves when no one was looking directly at them. Passages that led to the slides suddenly connected to dead ends. Climbing structures appeared to have more levels than when the children had first entered. "Has anyone seen Jason?" asked Mrs. Rodriguez, looking around frantically. Her 6-year-old son had been playing in the ball pit 20 minutes earlier, but now he was nowhere to be seen. The parents pressed against the glass, trying to spot Jason among the other children. But as they watched, they realized something terrifying. There were more children in the Playplace than had entered. Kids they didn't recognize were climbing through the tubes, sliding down the slides, playing games with their own children. Carol tried to open the door to the Playplace, but it was locked from the inside. There was no visible lock mechanism, no way to override the system. The children inside seemed unaware that anything was wrong, continuing to play with their new friends as if everything was perfectly normal. "Madison!" Carol called through the glass, tapping frantically. "Madison, come here!" Madison looked toward her mother and waved happily. She was holding hands with the little girl Carol had never seen before, a pale child with old-fashioned clothes and dark circles under her eyes. The strange girl whispered something in Madison's ear, and Madison nodded enthusiastically. Carol ran to the front counter, demanding that the manager unlock the Playplace immediately, but the teenage employee looked confused. "Ma'am, we don't have locks on the Playplace. It's always open." "Then why can't we get in?" Carol demanded. The employee walked over to the Playplace and tried the door. It opened easily for her, but when Carol tried to follow, she bounced off an invisible barrier, as if the doorway were sealed with glass. "I don't understand," the employee said. "The door is open." Carol realized that only certain people could enter the Playplace, and apparently she didn't qualify. She watched in horror as more strange children appeared in the playground. Kids from different eras, wearing clothes from the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. All of them were pale, quiet, and seemed to know exactly how to navigate the ever-changing maze of tunnels and platforms. The other parents were beginning to panic as well. Several of their children had disappeared into the deeper sections of the playground and hadn't been seen for over an hour. The tubes and tunnels now seemed to extend far beyond the physical boundaries of the restaurant, creating an impossible geography that defied explanation. Carol called the police, but when they arrived, they experienced the same problem. The Playplace appeared to be completely normal to them, just a standard McDonald's playground with children having fun. They couldn't see the strange kids, couldn't perceive the supernatural modifications to the equipment, and couldn't understand why the parents were so upset. "Your children are fine," the officer assured Carol. "I can see them playing right there." But Carol could see that the children he was pointing to weren't the same kids who had entered the Playplace. These were different children, wearing her daughter's clothes, but with subtly different faces, different mannerisms, different personalities. As evening approached, the strange children began to leave the Playplace through exits that hadn't existed before. They simply walked through solid walls, disappearing into spaces that shouldn't exist. But they took the original children with them, leading them by the hand into passages that led nowhere normal families could follow. Carol pressed against the glass, screaming for Madison, but her daughter was already gone. The child wearing Madison's clothes looked at Carol with cold eyes that held no recognition, no love, no memory of birthdays and bedtime stories, and all the moments that make a family. The McDonald's manager finally arrived and seemed genuinely confused by the situation. He checked the security cameras, but they showed only empty Playplace equipment. According to the video footage, no children had been in the playground all day. "This is impossible," he muttered, rewinding the tape. "The cameras show nothing, but you're telling me a dozen kids were just in there?" Carol realized that the supernatural children had somehow erased their presence from the electronic records. There would be no proof that the birthday party had ever happened, no evidence that 12 children had been replaced by supernatural duplicates. Over the following days, Carol tried to convince herself that the child living in her house was really Madison, but too many small details were wrong. This Madison didn't remember her favorite bedtime story, didn't react to the family dog, and had a strange habit of staring at walls as if she could see through them. The other parents reported similar experiences. Their children had returned, but they weren't quite the same. They played different games, had different preferences, and sometimes spoke about places and people that didn't exist in the normal world. Carol researched the history of the McDonald's location and discovered that it had been built on the site of a former orphanage. The Willowbrook Children's Home had operated there from 1943 until 1987, when it had been shut down following reports of abuse and neglect. Dozens of children had died at the facility over the years, victims of disease, malnutrition, and mistreatment. The supernatural children in the Playplace were the spirits of the Willowbrook orphans, still trapped in the location where they had suffered and died. They had been waiting decades for the chance to experience normal childhood, to have families, to live the lives that had been stolen from them. When the McDonald's had built its Playplace on the site, it had created a supernatural bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The orphan spirits could interact with living children, and eventually they had learned to switch places with them. Carol's real daughter was now trapped in whatever supernatural space the orphan children inhabited, while one of the long-dead Willowbrook residents was living Madison's life. The switch had been so complete that even Carol's memories were being altered, making it harder for her to remember exactly how Madison had been different. The Playplace continued to operate, hosting birthday parties and playdates, providing the orphan spirits with a steady supply of living children to study, imitate, and eventually replace. The supernatural children were patient, methodical, and completely convinced that they deserved the lives that had been denied to them in death. Carol sometimes caught glimpses of her real daughter in reflective surfaces, mirrors, windows, shiny spoons, always playing in some distant playground, always just out of reach. But these visions became less frequent as time passed, and Carol began to wonder if she was losing her mind, or if the supernatural replacement was somehow erasing her memories of the original Madison. The cycle continued at the Playplace, with new families bringing their children for birthday parties, never suspecting that some of the kids who left with them weren't the same ones who had entered. The Willowbrook orphans were finally getting their chance at normal family life, one stolen childhood at a time.